This is the audio test for the stream. We're going to begin in 23 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all fun. That's what my husband liked.
Tell them what I want.
Yeah.
So I'll jump that way with you.
Good. Thanks.
So living with you.
Yeah, praise God.
Bad one.
Yeah.
Oh, so
So great. Yeah, I'm not alone. I'm not alone, but he takes care of all the house.
he doesn't act as a partner, but your daughter's still in California. Well,
So expensive.
better be making good money if you're looking at California with the rent stuff.
Yeah.
The two rent.
Yeah.
Like 2-3 grand a month. My friend was dancing.
They send me a
He
lot.
was never give me This was about years ago. Like 10 years ago. Paying like $2,500.
Just.
No.
On there, there's like a retirement cake on top.
You see.
No, I just go on that. Just like that. Yeah.
Peter Piper. Yeah.
Yes, until the use is done. I get That's so nice.
I've been there for years.
I think like at least a year and a half.
Wonderful to finally meet you. Been emailing Yeah.
They're charging now $5.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't get really much.
Of course not. Yeah, I would like to also meet my.
One thing I like about it is that speaks to your the energy that's formed that came in the milk and I'm filling it out. I get the brand. Our method for property management. First, right, so if you have one in your office. Yes. I got it. I think it's like if you're making less than 30,000.
All right, give me a All right. Tilt it up towards the lighting just a little bit right there.
Stay focused right now.
Look at your face.
Tom, sorry, I think that's really interesting.
That's definitely.
Don't get some.
No, you're good. That's where that girl never worked for me ever. Better manual setting.
Are you on a mailing list? Yeah, excellent.
No, I'm just checking colors.
Yes, So, it's funny. I've been speaking to what the chart will say is that's what else there's no. Yeah, and that's why you're gonna mess with it. It's not the judging. I mean, it is up to you. It's up to people. Oh, really?
Yeah. The role of the judge is enforcement part. That's a change. The judge is I can tell you what's it's an answer when they'll see it. Well, I should let the judge do something. So I think that's what he said. We'll ask him, yeah. It's next week. I think he's speaking against they keep him busy. So, yeah, they keep him busy when he's. Good to see you again.
As I was sitting here, 15 more emails.
I didn't know that. I reminded them, were you near your archbishop was event a few years ago? Please be background. In New York. Part of the I'm here to take it back.
Doors.
We saw you like that.
Oh, good.
We want that.
Alum. And our kids are alum.
Can I pay the same tuition? You know, tuition. As long as you're getting cash directly to the professor. We need it.
Yeah, we have that on our homepage. We didn't take any pictures. I figured it's for the students. Oh, no, it's not.
I think that Remember, rain. When I left, I waited about 15, 20 minutes to yeah. So I have to. There are a lot of people who still make it, but they're not good to go.
Friends, welcome. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Philip Munoz. I'm the director of the Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Government. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event. I want to start by thanking Anabel Perez Wiegand, and the Carroll Lab for co-sponsoring, and the Ansari Institute for co-sponsoring today's event, and great friends and partners. So thank you very much. Thanks for everyone for coming. There's a sign-up sheet, I think, going around if you want to get on our email list. And be kept in the loop of what the center's up to, please sign up for the email list. I know we have a number of alumni in town this fall, and some of you have moved here. You are always welcome to our events. We love having Notre Dame alumni and members of the community here with us. I have a real privilege this afternoon of introducing our new co-director, Don Suleto. Don is a good friend. He just joined the center this summer, and we're just thrilled for him to be with us. Also thrilled that Annabelle has forgiven me for stealing him from the Kellogg Institute. Don has a PhD in constitutional history. He's taught history. His interests lie right in the heart of what the center does. He's been here at Notre Dame since 1842. He's been a great addition to the team, and he's going to host today's event. So, Don, wonderful.
Thank you, Professor Munoz, and thank you to all of you for joining us in celebrating the release of this wonderful book, The Peaceful Resolution of Territorial and Maritime Disputes, by Professors Emilia, Justyna Powell, and Krista E. Wiegand. First of all, as Philip noted, we are grateful to our co-sponsors for today's panel, and that includes the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion, the Rule of Law, the Constitutionalism and Rule of Law Policy and Practice Lab at the Kellogg Institute, and of course, the Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Government. This is a rich and marvelously detailed book about the complex means for peaceful resolution of international conflicts. It tells the story of the high stakes associated with settlement of territorial and maritime disputes, and how the unpredictability of outcomes push states to pursue strategic selection of a particular method, as well as forum shopping. As an historian and a former mediator, I found fascinating the story of the strategic selection process, especially how the decision-making process for peaceful resolution of international territorial disputes can often include the selection of equally complex strategic methods and means, such as bilateral negotiations, conciliation, mediation, arbitration, and adjudication, as well as strategic decisions on venue selection. This book offers us much. It is a rich narrative that draws from multiple disciplines and a range of sources. Moreover, even though the book focuses on complex means and methods, it does not ignore nor diminish the human, the historical, or the normative in its discussion of the descriptive and the strategic. For our format this afternoon, Professors Powell and Wiegand will provide initial remarks about their book. We also have a PowerPoint that you'll be able to see up front in the front, followed by commentary from Sheikh Abdulrahman. After our panelists have completed their remarks, we will open up the discussion to your questions, and that's when I will moderate your questions. Let me introduce our panelists. Emilia Justyna Powell is a professor of political science and a concurrent professor of law here at the University of Notre Dame. She is also, I'm proud to say, a faculty fellow at the Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Government. She has written extensively on international law, international courts, international dispute resolution, the Islamic legal tradition, and Islamic constitutionalism. She received her PhD in political science from Florida State University, and before joining the faculty here at Notre Dame, she taught at Georgia Southern University and the University of Alabama, that school of football team. Thank you. This is her third book. Her co-author is Krista E. Wiegand, a professor of political science at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Krista also serves as the director of the Global Security Program at the university's Howard H. Baker Jr. Center for Public Policy. She also serves as co-editor-in-chief of the journal International Studies Quarterly. Her research focuses on territorial and maritime disputes, conflict resolution and management, war and militarized interstate disputes, terrorism and political violence, bargaining strategies, international mediation, arbitration and adjudication of interstate and civil conflicts, and foreign policy strategies of states in East Asia. She received her PhD in political science from Duke University, and prior to her appointment at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, she taught at Georgia Southern University. This is her fourth book. Sheikh Abdulrahman al-Salimi is an official in the Ministry of Endowments and Religious Affairs in the Sultanate of Oman. He studies early Islamic texts, currently focusing on the authenticity and contents of embodied texts from the 8th and 9th centuries to further the understanding of early Islamic political and theological thought. He is the director of the journal Tafahum and has written extensively on the literature of early Islam, Quranic studies, and modern religious tendencies in the Islamic world. Please direct your attention to our co-authors. We'll begin with them, Emilia and Krista.
Thank you very much, Don, for the introduction, and thank you very much to everyone who has joined us here to celebrate our book. I will stand here because I just speak better when I stand. So the book is really unique in the way that we conceptualize those disputes. Territorial and maritime disputes are really important. There are many of them going on right now. And in the past, they have caused a lot of deaths, a lot of hurt, and a lot of human unhappiness. And this is why we study in this book how states peacefully settle those disputes, because that's the most important goal, I think, is how to peacefully end something that causes so much stress in humans and in just a practice and policy making. I think the book is unique because, as Don so kindly noted, we not only focus on the theory of political science and international relations, which I must admit is very dry sometimes, but we bring insights from the real world, which is super valuable because those disputes affect so many people, and it's important to speak to people that are engaged in the resolution of this dispute. So Krista and I, for several years, we conducted multiple interviews with judges from international courts, such as International Court of Justice, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. We spoke with arbitrators. We spoke with lawyers who represent countries that are trying to resolve those disputes. We spoke with diplomats, generals, all kinds of people to make sure that our book brings a full picture of how those disputes are resolved. It's really not accurate to talk about territorial and maritime disputes without bringing it down to the human level. And this is what the book does. In addition to providing the usual political science approach, so large data set analysis of all cases of territorial disputes since Second World War till right now. I think the highlight of the book is a chapter that talks about the arbitration in the South China Sea dispute, which is obviously one of the most important maritime and territorial disputes going on right now. And I don't know how to switch to the next slide. So we have a little situation. But anyway, I'm going to talk about, that's right. I'm going to now talk about if there is a territorial and maritime dispute, what states can do. They can do nothing about it. They can say, oh, you know, we actually are fine with this dispute. It is not too costly, so we're just going to maintain the status quo. They can, of course, use force. And we do see it in the case of Russia invading Ukraine. There's a territorial dispute. The resolution is definitely not peaceful. It is forceful. But states can also decide, well, you know what? We want to do something about it. We don't want to use force. We want to peacefully resolve it. And this is where the book sits. In the process of decision making, when states already decided that they're going to do something positive about the book, something peaceful. And this is really my favorite slide because it has pictures and visualization is wonderful. So what can states do when they decide to settle a dispute? First of all, they can negotiate. This is really easy. This picture with the women and the heads and everybody looking happy is actual negotiations between Belgium and France over their dispute over border, which was a river. They finally settled it. They're all happy. No more dispute. But sometimes states can use other methods, such as mediation, conciliation, and other difficult names that I'm not going to bother you with. But I'm going to talk about the picture. The picture is a image from maritime border between Israel and Lebanon that just got settled in October, I believe, of last year. Literally days after the settlement, Krista and I climbed on a military tower to overlook the border that you can't really visualize because it's sea. But it's a huge success of a mediated efforts by United States to settle that border. When states want to settle their dispute, such as on the very right-hand side, over an island, over another maritime border, they can also go to court. So this is getting serious now. They don't want to negotiate. They don't want to mediate. They want to do something really big, like go to a court. And these are images from disputes between Eritrea and Yemen and Bahrain and Qatar. Those two disputes were settled, one via adjudication, so courts, second via arbitration. So this is what the book looks at. First, why would any state try to negotiate over mediation, over adjudication? Why do states choose a different method? And when we look at all of the disputes since Second World War, we see that states love negotiation. This is the easiest. They don't cost anything. They just sit down and talk. Sometimes they arbitrate. Sometimes they go to court. But, they much rather stay away from the courts. Okay. Yes. So now the heart of the book is the theory. But I'm going to, again, make it kind of approachable for everybody because we highlight the individual input in the resolution. So when we ask why do states seek different peaceful resolution methods to settle those disputes, it's all about strategy. Sometimes we hear statements just like the ones I just mentioned, that Lebanon settled a dispute with Israel. Yes, great, but it's really hundreds of lawyers on both sides and hundreds of policymakers, diplomats, military officials, foreign policy officials, having an elaborate strategy how to settle their disputes in an optimal way. What's an optimal way? Every state wants to win. Because we're talking about territory, maritime zones, a lot of money involved, a lot of lives of people. So states definitely want to win those disputes. At the least, they don't want to lose. And while doing all this, they want to be certain that the likelihood of winning is high. So what do? You hire a bunch of people to help you out. Depending what you want, you're going to hire best specialists in this to get you that island, get you that maritime entitlement, get you that maritime swath of sea, so you win the dispute. And what do states strategize about? First of all, they strategize about what venue to choose. Should we negotiate? Should we mediate? Or should we go to the court? Those lawyers tell them the probability. If you go to the court, you're like 75.5% likely to win. If you mediate, it's 50-50. We don't know. They are paid a lot of money to provide those probabilities. But also the strategy continues once those two states agree to a method. Let's say two states agree to go to international court. Those lawyers get busy. How do we make sure that we win the case? Who do we choose as a judge? Who do we choose as an arbitrator? What maps do we use? And this is what we spoke with multiplicity of people about, how that strategy is constructed to win. My favorite slide is, I think, the next slide, because maps are used to visualize and to strategize. This map is a rock star. Every presentation I have given about this, I just ask the question, what does the red thing look like? You know, we don't have time, but can you tell me what does the red part of the image remind you of? Okay, the lawyers saw it much quicker than you. It looks like a bird, predatory seabird, okay? So this is the situation. When you see the red part, there's a little island that's like the eye of the bird. It's Barbados. It's the island of Barbados. And the beak is eating Trinidad and Tobago, okay? This is the map actually that was used in the International Court of Justice. And the lawyer of that food, Trinidad and Tobago, hired a lawyer to present their case in the International Court of Justice. The lawyers hired our acquaintance to draw the map. And the map drawer, he says, well, you know, I apologize. The map is kind of drastic. It looks like a bird eating. He says, no, let's leave it. And here is how the opening statement of the lawyer was. This is in front of like the most important international court. Actually, it looks to me like a predatory seabird about to eat the island of Tobago. Remember the food, which makes Barbados research overtures to Tobago part of the picture, you may say. After all, they might as well finish the job having eaten the surrounding environment. There's nothing left by the egg. This is what's going on in an international court. It's strategy. You know, the people that really didn't care to present this map this way were, of course, the Barbados people. They presented this map on the bottom. I would say kind of boring, yes? This is all about strategy, and this is what the book is about. Now I'm going to turn it to my favorite co-author, Krista.
Okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly for a few minutes about the South China Sea dispute, because this is the meat of the real world case that we looked at. We looked at a lot of cases like Barbados, Trinidad, Tobago. But the South China Sea case, how many, just raise your hand if you're familiar with this or you've heard of this dispute. So a lot of people. It's been going on, it's still going on. So this dispute was not resolved, but in 2013, the Philippines essentially sued China. Okay, so small country, weak, poor country sues big, powerful China. And what they did is they decided we're going to go to arbitration, one of these options that Emilia mentioned, and it's specifically called Annex 7. That's not really important in terms of this presentation, but the reason I mention it is because this was a specific type of venue that the lawyers in the government of the Philippines were very specific. They were very careful about choosing this particular arbitration panel because of the way this panel was made up and how they could choose the judges to be arbitrators and the different kinds of rules and procedures and such that they could take advantage of to make it more likely that they would win. So what the Philippines did is said, we want to go to a law firm. They've interviewed law firms and they said, I want you to tell us how we can win this case. And one law firm said something, another law firm said a different. And finally, they chose a law firm in Washington, D.C. And this guy said, I'm going to win your case. And I'm going to tell you how we're going to do this. So it was not, okay, let's just go and try to win whatever we can. It was, we're going to win. They had a 100% knowledge they were going to win if they did it a certain way, okay? So the main objective of this award, you may be familiar, if you want to go to the next slide, oh no, it's not on there, but that's okay. If you can kind of see it, it's not the best map, but between China and the Philippines there is the South China Sea, and there's a dash line that the Chinese issued. It's called the 9-dash line. They just recently, actually last week, issued another map that includes Taiwan, so it's now a 10-dash line. But this is called the 9-dash line, and this is essentially China claims all of those waters, okay? That the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia also, and Taiwan also claim. And the Philippines said, we want to invalidate that. We want the tribunal to say, this is illegal. And we're going to figure out how to do that. So, okay. So what was the strategy? So this is the lawyer. I interviewed him in Washington, the lead counsel. And what he said is, what is the scope of and what would be the viability of arbitration under UNCLOS? UNCLOS is the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. This is where this Annex 7 arbitration is. Is there jurisdiction? Jurisdiction just means, can we have is this the right venue for these claims at the court? What kind of claims could survive? What that means, what can we bring to this panel that will say, yeah, you're likely to actually win. That's what he means by survive. And would those claims, if they prevailed, provide meaningful relief? These are all legal jargon. What it just simply means is, how can we win? We're going to bring the claims. We're going to survive the challenges by China, if there are any. And the goal was to craft something that could prosper. In other words, win. Okay, next slide. All right. So what they did, instead of going to say, these are our islands, this is our water, and that is not China's water. What they did instead is they said, we're going to only focus on certain claims. We're only going to bring certain claims. We're not going to go after everything, because they would lose. They knew they would lose if they did everything. So they said, we're just going to get a little, these certain parts. And what they did is they looked at all of these, we call them, a lot of people just refer to them as islands, but they're reefs and shoals and rocks, and there are hundreds of them in the South China Sea. Some of them are actual islands. And what they did is they said, we're going to determine, we want these arbitrators to look at these features of these maritime features and say, are these islands or not? Because if they're not islands, no one, meaning China, nor the Philippines, could actually use those islands to get access to the water. You saw the bird, how much Barbados wanted, those 200 miles. So the Philippines was saying, if these are not islands, nobody can actually have 200 nautical miles of access, including the Philippines. So what they actually did is they said, we're going to deny China access, but we're also going to deny ourselves, which is, you would think, counterintuitive. Like, why would they give up their own, claims? But the main purpose was to deny China. So that was the main goal. So next slide. So what they did is they avoided certain claims. They said, we are not going to talk about historic title because China said we are exempt from that. We're not discussing that. They didn't talk about any sovereignty because that didn't fit in the meaning territory. And they didn't talk about any maritime boundary, another issue that China refused to look at. And here you can actually see the South China, the 9 dash line. It's not the dash, but in my mind, doesn't that look like a tongue, like reaching down? Okay, so very much like the bird map. This is the big, like a giant mouth eating the South China Sea. And in all these overlapping lines. So they basically said, we're not going to do any of these things. We're not going to claim islands. We're going to say, these are not islands. So it's like completely the reverse of what they went in. So in the end, if you want to go to the next slide, in the end, what the Philippines won is, after 3 years of arbitration, they won 12 of their 15 claims, the most important ones. And it was, even though in international law, it's not like in domestic law where you have precedent and cases that build on each other, but it is treated as customary law. So other countries, other governments look to this case and they say, aha, see what they did? And there are now many other countries that have similar problems that are looking and have learned from this case and say, okay, look what the Philippines did. They were very, very strategic about this. Now, the downside, of course, is China did not participate in the case. In fact, just like these tables, there's an excellent photo, I wish I had it, where the Philippines is on one side, the defense and the prosecution, they're on one side. And there's water, glasses of water on the front, and there's nobody on this side, like completely empty. And the glasses are still there, just in case they show up, right? Of course, they didn't. They did not comply either. They still have not complied. They've denied that it's a legitimate case, even though it was in international law. So I just want to, that was just an illustration of what we talk about in the book, how really this is a much more complex thing. It's not just about law. It's not just about politics. It's not just about judges and lawyers and mediators. It's lots and lots of people, many, many years of deciding these. And territory is the #1 cause of war. Maritime battles states fight wars over for centuries. They've fought over land and water, and so resolving these is very, very important. So we essentially found that yes, states are strategic. They want to win. They want to be, make sure that they are have a higher chance of winning. And it is really about combining politics and international law together. So I'll leave it at that and let our discussant make comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank you, firstly, the University of Notre Dame for this invitation at the center. And thank you, Dan, for this introduction, and also to Emilia and Krista for their congregation book. I would like to start. There is a version of the ancient of Spain sport of bull fightings known as fighting bull of Alaman, in which two fighters fight at the same time while warped in the same cave. The rule of that, the fighter deliver lethal blow to the bull stimulously, and one condition of this dangerous sport stipulates that a participant must be blood brothers and can be played only once in 50 years or twice a century. In the present case, we have two women engaged in writing the same book from identical angle, so that there is no difference between them. Though, as far as the bull is concerned, to continue in this analogy, the only aspect that concerns us here is the subject of their thesis. In other words, conflicts between the states and over territories and maritime areas. The version about the poles can be found in the Pablo Neruda in his biography, the chapter of Spain in My Heart, while meeting Federico Lorca. The main focus of their books is on the issue of that the critical importance of the world is peace, the peaceful resolution of difference between state over ownership of areas of land and the sea. In examining the complexity of international disputes, it's considered the options of reaching settlement and the way in which states approach their chosen methods. Such methods can include negotiation and non-binding procedures like mediation, reconciliation, investigation, and good offices, as well as implementation of a great solution, including arbitration and legal procedures. That the basic thesis of their book is that the nature of states to seek way of resolving disputes peacefully within the framework of their strategic options. That is to say, it's a way of minimize their loss and maximize their profits. We can see one example of the singular approach to the project in the case of the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze and the physiologist Félix Guattari, who described themselves as two streams flowing into the one of the same river. And indeed, all authors also share the same unique attribute. In their introductory thanks and acknowledgement section also compare their work, the two streams flowing into one river. In the case river two of research into the peaceful resolution of territorial and maritime disputes, Emilia is primarily concerned with the legal process of settling disputes, while Krista focuses more specifically on territorial and maritime conflicts. And it was their common interest in disputes and inexorable relation between the different aspects of the issue that brought the two of them together. After all, research into conflict does not necessarily mean that the researcher have to have conflicting points of view. On contrary, different parties of share identical position and cooperated, and that is what has happened in the case of this book. When considering the basic elements of the book, it would be useful to distinguish between philosophical and methodological way. With regard to the former, we can detect the two elements. Historically, as far as mankind concerned, philosophy has two views of the humanity. One maintains that a human social group or their own origin to man's natural reconciliation toward conflicts or mutual hostility. This is in Machiavelli, Hobbes, and Hegel. In political and anthropological philosophy, this is known as agnostic tendency. On the other hand, there is a view which sees that man and human society are being essentially harmonized, specific and conciliatory is nature, like Rousseau and alike to his alike. In our time, thanks to modern philosophy discourse, these two views re-emerged in the new and different forms. Political dialectic of Leo Strauss and Carl Schmitt, and Chantal Mouffe, dialectic against Habermas on political concord or division. The impression is that on the basis of their observation on what's happening in the world around them, the author of this book is inclined towards the agonistic position. They both noted the conflict of land and sea areas that claim sovereignty over them, whether or not the parties concerned actually possess them, are normal features of international relations. And secondly, both authors have opted portray conflicts and as a consequence of the expectancy tendency. That is to say, they maintain the action of the state are guided by the principle of profit and lose. Practice there describe strategic accounting in other words, every state, whatever the nature of status, set out its account in a way that will ensure to drive maximum profit when resolving disputes. This involved many varying of adoption, calculated strategies and tactics. Moreover, its slogan of some phenomenologists, philosophical, is back to the things themselves, in contrast to the slogan back to the text. Preferring by the certain interpretative thinkers or author slogan, if they had one, would be closer to the former than the latter. Back to the practice with probably some of their approaches. So much of the book's anthropological, political, social, legal, philosophical elements, its methodological aspect, including inductive tendency, in which the author inevitably focus on condition or factual evidence and the event. They constantly supported their assertion by citing evidence from the past, particularly when they discussing the present day incident of an events. Of the book's approximately 300 pages, nearly every page offer evidence that cites condition or events as an example. Hence, the philosophical and methodological element of this book show a pragmatic tendencies as inductive tendency as well as agnostic tendency. Sometimes the author acknowledgement this explicitly, while the other times they imply it, in which remained us of the time of French philosopher Michel Foucault was asked, why isn't Karl Marx mentioned? Why isn't Karl Marx mentioned as one of the sources as a reference of your book? His reply was, when I use the author I like, I don't need to mention their names. In other words, they are alike a toolbox that a person uses without having to name his tools. This is what the author have done within their books. They have sometimes assumed the three tendencies without specifying their specialties. If we would like to summarize the books, the cover, that is, they have 8 elements, that is to say, that is, firstly, there is no state without territory over their exercise its sovereignty. The second, the conflict over territory are older than conflict over maritime areas. And the third, because of the point 2, the law of the sea state as jurisdiction over the land, determination, jurisdiction over sea areas. And fourth, the practice experience show that the nature of state action is broadly determined by the domestic and international political consideration, as well as by the nature, attributes, value of dispute territory, and the relation between the state involved in the dispute. And fifth, the disputes between states are never static. They are always dynamic and multifaceted by the contents of the state of flux. Sixth, any state seeking a solution to disputes should be procedure described by the author as a strategic path. It's up to the states concerned to choose the most expanded strategy to settling their disputes. That is the strategy that will be best serve their interest. And second, during the course of their disputes, state needed to opt the most effective and visible way reconciling mean with the ends. This is why there are so many different ways available for resolving disputes. And the eighth, in settling their dispute, the option of the state to choose may expose to the risk of losing the case. And that finally, the dialectical interaction between the two legal systems, domestic and international, to which state return of settling disputes. The general rules here is that the state concerned will look to international law from a perspective of their own domestic law, while seeking to ensure ruling which lead to an outcome to the serve of their interests. The route they gamble will only be fraught with the risk and uncertainty, which means the state that need to go for the strongest option, the best support of their case, while rejecting the weaker options. If the book to line between the approach between theoretical and pragmatic, the author approached their study from 2 angles: comprehensive, covering the whole argument, peaceful settlement through all the stages, and empirical in their example are taken from a wide range of relevance event and accidents. In doing so, they pose the following question about the literature that already exists on the topic, which is already they discussed. What mean distinguishing feature of a study on territorial and maritime disputes? Their answer, they are few in number, and they tend approaches the subject from narrow, fragmented, and highly specialized perspective. This is, they say, is because, firstly, a number of study of the subject almost they are counting on finger of hand in this subject. Secondly, most existing studies take a fragmentary approach to dispute. That is to say, limit themselves to specific factor or legal consideration that influence the route states choose for settling their disputes. For example, the nature of the political system, the type of alliance, the importance of and value of the dispute territory or the sea area, the history, the dispute, and the status of the parties' membership of international bodies. Thirdly, the massive study of this field highly specialized, but in negative sense. The word specialization is normally used in a positive sense, or at least not prerogative. However, one of the shortcoming of the narrow specialization is that if it is excessive, it will paradoxically defeated in own purpose. An exclusive concern with a single area is like eating only one type of food, which is in one of the causes of malnutrition. Those contributions in the field are written solely by specialists in law or politician and decision maker. Their focus will be on practical issues, and they may tend to ignore or reject the theoretical aspect. On the other hand, the two authors have no desire to dig the grave of theory. On the contrary, they aim to pose the fundamental theoretical question, why and how. In the other word, they examine the rationals that cause state to prefer a certain course of action for resolving disputes and devising strategic, and unlike those with the narrow specialization, the law and politics. They don't see rational as feeling outside the realm of investigation and area of competence. Let me, from theoretical perspective, the book adopts rational choose perspective and see the way states behave as a strategy and base it on analysis of the cost benefit involves. Those, rather than being a book purely about theory or purely about the practice, it stress a middle course between the two and make empirical study of international law in order to understand how to operate in specific situation and in relation to specific states. About the methodology, rather than applying one-side methodology, the author approach is what we might call multifaceted. This reflects the fact that is explaining earlier that the book was written not by one person but two. They are not only concerned with interpreting static and number, they have also acquired their data about the facts on the ground through interview and the face-to-face encounter, because their view static are only effective of interpreting and rationalizing the visible symptomism. In the other respect, they are static, are deaf and dumb, and need someone to make them talk. And in the author's view, the people who can make them talk are government legal advisor, judge, and lecturers, and student of international law, senior official, and other experts. Those the hermeneutic that we need apply the similar. If we talk about the biblical and sacred way, sacred text of Quran and public, they don't talk, they don't have tongue, but only the readers can make them to speak. Let me to jump about the structure of the books, because the time they give me limits. So I would like to go to the conclusion. The book's main conclusion may be summarized as follows. Many human experiences are essentially amalgam of individual decision, and it is that provide the basis of the state strategic choice. And secondly, every method of resolving disputes peacefully is reflecting of the effectiveness of and values of international law. It is invariably implemented within the context, the difficult condition arising from the global balance of power. The author's own stance here may describe as a kind of political realism. The authors agree with the subject of their interview, who stressed the importance of a range of different options for resolving the dispute peacefully. They quote him as saying, in the end, a range of alternative options is best way of resolving international disputes. And fourth, all available peaceful conflict resolution measures, from negotiation to litigation, enjoy degree of flexibility that allow the dispute state to try to promote their own interest. And fifth, The main point of the author in this book, that is the best route to conflict resolution available in international law is the one that gives equal weight of both parties. However, combination of the other factor may lead them to choose the other routes, including mediation and other binding and non-binding solution. And finally, the author have implicitly adopted the system known as modest epistemology. That is to say, they expose the ideas presenting a knowledge without making a great claim for it, or rather asserts that is also they have tried to follow the principle of comprehensiveness. Total comprehensiveness is epistemological impossible. Therefore, they do not claim to be familiar with all the dynamics pretending to the resolution of territorial and maritime disputes, because it is not possible to do so. This is by the fact they examine enormous example of different types of strategic behavior engaging by various states. They concede the certain social, political, and strategic matters will always remain beyond the research key. The author also accept their theories, like any social theory, is based on a simplified model. So consequently, it cannot cover every aspect of higher complex disputes. After all, it's impossible to take account of every factor that significant for the resolution of a dispute, since the various historical, geographical, and political reasons. Every dispute or conflict is its own way unique, and furthermore, the decision of unsettling the dispute are in the hand of individual leaders, parliament, lawyer, and the way of conduct their affair is not always eternally rational. My finally congratulations for both of you for this wonderful text books. It really will be a reference, and I wish you all my best to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are now gonna, using that rich start, open it up for questions. Before we do so, I just have a quick question for the authors. In the Barbados versus Trinidad and Tobago example, is that map perhaps a model of the angry bird approach? That was a joke, sorry. Okay, couldn't resist. Yeah, our tradition is to give the first question and answer to a Notre Dame student, preferred undergrad. So students, I know that there's a lot to chew on in this. What are your questions? And if you could go ahead and give us your name and your major. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Abby, and I'm a political science and global affairs double major. So I know that you said that the case wasn't officially kind of finalized because China didn't participate. So this is a couple of questions in one, but I was kind of wondering what the current state is of the territorial dispute, not only between China and the Philippines, but also those other islands within the chain. And then also kind of following up, do you foresee in the future China ever kind of acknowledging the ruling of this case? And if so, like, how would that ever come to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's been 7 years now, and some people have said, skeptics have said the case didn't matter. But the United States, as you probably know, is not getting along with China very well right now. And the US, a few years ago, because of the case, acknowledged not only did they agree to the case, but they said, if China does anything about the Philippines, which is an ally, or related countries who are partners, we will step in. And so now all of a sudden this dispute, because of the case and how it was highlighted, the US has become a defender of these countries. And so it's kind of put China on the defense a little more. So it didn't work as well to China didn't comply with the law in the court or the tribunal, but the case led to something even more. So as I mentioned last week, China did push the boundary a little bit, and they do that every once in a while. But what's happened lately is the Philippines, Vietnam, also lots of other countries are really standing up to China much more as a result of the case. And what they're doing is they're sailing their ships through the sea, the South China Sea. China will shoot water cannons or like military grade lasers. They actually temporarily blinded a Philippine sailor a few weeks ago, and now this is making international news, and everyone is against China in this case. I'm not saying in general. And so China is really looking like the bad guy in many ways, and they just can't get ahead. Like there's no one's going to support them except themselves, maybe North Korea. And so it's really about reputation and about there's also a trickle effect where trade issues are now being affected because of this, and human rights issues and all these other issues that have nothing to do with territorial and maritime disputes, but because of this cascade effect of the case, China is on the defense much more than it ever has before. And I don't think China will comply ever. They have said that they have their own Chinese domestic law that overrides international law. It's a little more complicated than to go into, but the rest of the world disagrees, and so who's right, who's wrong? It's not like half the world supports China, right? So it's even though they're not complying, they're clearly breaking the law, and everybody knows it.
Thank you, Abby. Yes, over there.
Yeah, look, my name is Ashwin. I'm a first year majoring in global affairs. Just wanted to ask, in a hypothetical dispute in the future between territories, what do you think is the most effective way to resolve it while still having some level of enforcement, like to essentially avoid the situation of China just ignoring courts' decisions? So what do you think is the most effective way to have countries abide by the decisions made in binding?
So are you talking just about binding method or just any method?
I don't know, how do you
it depends. So for instance, you take countries that are neighbors, they share a border and otherwise have a good relations. They're not going to take each other to the court. It would look bad. And they don't want to jeopardize their relations even to get the optimal outcome for a particular state. They'll say, we are willing to get a suboptimal outcome to be happy and be able to take a picture in the heads, like I showed you. Because it's always important to contextualize benefits and costs of settling a particular issue in a broader context of a relationship. And this is what a lot of people told us. Some things look better for you, for two states that hate each other already, than for states who are otherwise friendly. I would say there is not one answer to your question because it so depends. This is why we talk to so many people, Sometimes disputes are unable to be settled via a friendly way because states mistrust each other. In that case, they're going to go to an international court. Sometimes the policymakers, they don't want to deal with the repercussion of settling something not in a way that their people want. So they say, well, we really abide by international rule of law. We're going to neatly put it in a package to international court, let them deal with it. Because if there is a negative outcome, they can turn around and say to their own people, see, the international court said so. We can't do anything about it, even though it's suboptimal. It's so complicated. But thank you for your great question.
And I'm just going to quickly add one thing that is related to Emilia's comment about how states can even fight wars. We didn't get into that in our book, but there are many cases where, like Argentina and the United Kingdom fought a war, the Falklands War in the early 1980s. They will never negotiate because they fought that war, and neither side will back down ever. So that dispute will just go on for decades, and it's already been a couple of centuries. So that's another scenario where they won't even try. So they're not even going to bother.
We had a question right up here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your presence. So I'm a Kurd from Mesopotamia, and our territories have been invaded by 4 countries with the state sovereignty. But this is a very complex issue. I don't want to go there. So around 30 years ago, we declared a semi-autonomous region in Iraq. Now we're living in Iraq. And you mostly talked about state as like, there are so many disputes where non-state actors are actually involved with state actors. So disputes could be not only between state actors, but for example, in our case, we have an area which is called disputed area in Iraq. It has been there a case for like 30 years. And when in 2014, ISIS attacked this area, so they conducted massacre, genocide, killing, ethnic cleansing, and etc., etc. In 2007, we went back to the area, we liberated from the terrorists. But then the Iraqi army again attacked the Kurdish people there, and they took back the territories. So is your book addressing some highlights or key points how to solve these issues where there's not only state actors, but sometimes there's state and non-state actors, and they don't want to negotiate, they don't want to go to talks, they don't listen to international court. So how are we going to address this kind of scenarios? Thank you.
So I can start and you can follow up. We always coordinate very well. I know. Okay, so our book is mainly about states dispute resolution because we're talking about the UN Charter that proposes, that mandates peaceful resolution of disputes to states. Now, multiplicity of disputes like the one that you're talking about are so complicated and involve non-state actors. However, in the International Court of Justice, for instance, only a state can be a party. Non-state actors do not have a standing in that court. For instance, the International Court of Justice would be able to answer the question, is certain action legal or illegal according to international law? But a non-state party cannot be a part to the legal proceedings. The International Court of Justice could issue an advisory opinion in which there are no parties, and it can address a situation that involves or pertains to a non-state actor.
They did this with the Palestinian
The
situation.
building of the wall. That's right. Yes. So, international law, states are the main subject of international law. And only recently, non-state actors have become part of international law, individuals, and recently, 20th century.
And most of the non-state actor conflicts you're talking about are dealt with by mediation. That's the most effective way. Of course, getting them to go to mediation in the first place is complicated, and then trusting the mediator, choosing them, and then of course complying. So we do talk a little bit about the mediation case that could apply to non-state actors as well. But yeah, very complicated situation.
We have time for one last question, and the young man back there with the blue sweatshirt.
Yes, my name is Henry Cardall. I'm a theology major in Freeman, and I'm doing Army ROTC here, so I'm around active duty officers quite often, and I just hear about how the U.S. Army specifically is like pulling out of the Middle East and stuff. I see a lot of optimism for all the military is going to start to be more of a humanitarian aid type of force. I'm wondering, is it possible to get so good at this dispute resolution that we can really have the time for that, and then or that we won't see force in the military? Is force really, is it always going to be there? Is it going to be necessary, or is this peaceful resolution possible?
Force is always going to be there. I'm sorry to say. I'm not I can't, of course, I'm not a somebody who sees the future. But no, I think that it's just changing, changes of using force and different types. So in the focus of the U.S. military right now is naval and air, in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's different than it was in the Middle East. But dispute resolution, as we talked about, is also possible. So it's so complex, as Emilia said, and it depends on the dispute. So some disputes you're likely to see force. Other disputes, it's a lot easier to resolve them peacefully, and they don't need to fight a conflict.
But I also want to add that almost every dispute that has a period of militarization, even intense, does experience peaceful attempts at resolution. We don't hear about those. Because on the news, what gets to us is the military conflictual solutions. But very oftentimes, those militarized solutions, are preceded by multiplicity of approaches that we talked about, and then they come afterwards as well. I would say 70% of disputes, like at some point in their lifespan, have had significant approaches at dispute resolution, or even more. I mean, they are just repeated. We just don't hear about it. And sometimes on purpose, we don't hear about it because it's not in the best interest of the conflict to know about who is helping whom. Yeah, a great question.
I'm sorry to say that we've run out of time already.
We're happy to answer questions after.
Perfect. And our co-authors and our guests are willing to answer questions afterwards. So I'll let you go ahead and do that. Until then, we have a couple of tasks before us. One is to thank our guest, Sheikh Abdulrahman al-Salimi, for his commentary. Thank you for all of your questions. I know there are some fantastic ones that we couldn't get to. And then finally, to thank and to congratulate our two co-authors, Professors Powell and Wiegand, for their marvelous book. Awesome.
How are you?
I checked that. I was walking in at the table. I found it never So good to see you.
Almost taken down by a lady.
Yeah, I raised my hand when he shut me down. I want to be connection to the previous book. Wow. Yeah, there's time for like breakfast or coffee. Yes, very nice. Congratulations.